You're watching Talking Points, a focus on the political scene in Lubbock and across the South Plains.
And joining us now is veteran Texas politics reporter with the Houston Chronicle, the San Antonio Express News, the Texas Take. Am I missing anything? Mr. Jeremy Wallace, thank you for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be on the show.
You have put a lot of miles on your car this campaign cycle, driving everywhere where the candidates are going. And this cycle, that includes a lot of places on the South Plains for both parties, coming here seemingly more than they have in the past. And you just wrote a big article in the Houston Chronicle, which says that you think that this election may just come down to some of the sparsely populated areas around the Panhandle and the South Plains. Why do you think that?
Well, it's simple math at this point. You know, the Democrats have really been able to grow their numbers along I-35, you know, from Dallas to San Antonio and around Houston. And they've really they've added almost 1 million people, registered voters in those areas. So they have a lot more voters to kind of build off of. And that puts, even more pressure on Republicans to really do well in places they do well in, right? And so in one of those areas, is the South Plains and in the Panhandle. They've got to get a big number out of the Panhandle to balance off what's happening in these other cities that have gone really way bluer than I think they anticipated this fast.
Yeah, if you were, it is all a numbers game, right? If you were the political consultant to, say, Beto's campaign, for example, would you be advising them that this kind of strategy of getting out here out west so much is worth it? You know, if you look at just Lubbock County, say, Cruz, Abbott have been there, or in the past have been upwards of 60% here, and there's probably more Democrats in one neighborhood of Houston than there is in all of Lubbock County, right? So if it is a numbers game, why not go where the numbers are east of I-35? What do you think is the unique advantage of their campaign out west here?
Well, that's funny because I asked Beto O'Rourke, I said, this is kind of a kamikaze mission when you're going to some of these places. Yeah, he's going to Muleshoe and he was going to Dumas, places that he has no prayer of doing really well in, right? But he is convinced that he can trim enough of the margins in places like that that he can get an advantage. And the proof in that for him has been when he goes to these events, there'll be a lot more people than I would have expected to begin with. But what he does is he gets their phone numbers, he gets their email addresses, and he's able to kind of follow up with them and almost build like a network of supporters who can go door to door for him up in those areas, try to find their friends. And so he's being pretty aggressive about it, and he's convinced he can trim enough of the margins to make the difference. If he's able to do that, you can see where it'd be even more pressure on Abbott and the Republicans, because look, they're going to do very poorly in Houston and Harris County and in San Antonio. They got to get everything they can out of where they are going to be strongest. And if Beto can trim that margin in places like Muleshoe and Pampa, it's a different game. It changes everything. And so they've got to shut him out there. They have to win 75% of the voters in the South Plains and in the Panhandle, or it's lights out.
And Abbott has said as much, by the way. Last time he was in Lubbock, this was months ago, but he said almost verbatim, I can't win 60% of Lubbock County. I got to win 65, 75%, because he knows that, and his campaign has taken him out west as well. I want to ask you about another race for lieutenant governor, which has seen some interesting, I guess you could call them defections from the Republican Party. Prominent Republicans like Tarrant County Judge Whitley and Amarillo State Senator Kel Seliger declining to endorse Dan Patrick, instead endorsing Democratic challenger Mike Collier. What do you make of that? Do you think that makes any tangible difference to Collier's campaign?
It does in some ways and not in others. So one, endorsements are overclassified most of the time. Like, regular normal human beings aren't going to vote for a candidate one way or other because of Kel Seliger or, Judge Whitley in Fort Worth. That's not going to happen much. But what it does, it sends a signal to other voters that, Collier might be acceptable to a certain kind of Republican. Think like the George H.W. Bush Republicans that, are still with us. They voted for Bushes in the past, and they're looking for somebody who kind of fits that mode more. And if the Republican Party looks like it's gone too far, gone too, Trumpish, in the minds of some of those folks, they might be looking for a different kind of, voice. And so I think that gives Collier an opportunity to try to make the sale to those folks. Look, he's got a lot of work to do to make that, go further. And in the cases of a guy like Kel Seliger, who was a mayor of a government, and in the case of Judge Whitley in Fort Worth, these are local government people who were offended by how the state government overruns local government control on a lot of issues. And so there's a whole other area of politics that those guys are fighting about. So a much shorter answer is that I don't think it has a big bearing on things, in that race, but it gives Collier an opportunity to use those endorsements to try to sell himself to moderate Republicans who normally would have voted for a George W. Bush or a George H.W. Bush in the past.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Sometimes there is as big of a political debate over local versus state government as there is Republican versus Democrat, right? And we're kind of seeing that play out.
Yeah, that's been a big deal with the legislature for the last few years. Like we know that there's been this constant tension between the state government and local governments, maybe even more so than we were used to seeing in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. These last 4 years have been much more intensive. And I think that's why you see a guy like Kel Seliger, while he is a state senator, his tenure as a city government guy is really kind of what drove a lot of the tension that he had with Dan Patrick. So it wasn't totally a shock that he would say, I'm not voting for Dan Patrick. What was shocking was it was really close to a microphone.
Right. Well, Jeremy Wallace, where does the campaign trail bring you next?
Who knows? Every morning, thanks to a very super competitive environment in Texas, who knows where I'm going to be next? Sometimes I'm in Del Rio, sometimes in Houston. I have to kind of check every morning when I wake up. It's like, what bed am I in? Am I in a hotel or am I home yet? Yeah. So it's going to be a lot of time on the road. And thank goodness I have a lot of Willie Nelson in the old CD player, so I'll be just fine.
Well, we're glad you're out there. Hope that you can make your way back out west sometime soon.
Yep, you betcha.
Thank you, Jeremy, for coming on. Jeremy's article in the Houston Chronicle is called How the Biggest Republican Stronghold in Texas Could Cost Abbott His Job. Go ahead and check that out. Also listen to the Texas Take every Friday with our friend Scott Braddock. Jeremy, thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, guys.
And still to come, we'll take a local look at the top political headlines of the week.